Beverly Anderson, a single mother who built a thriving restaurant from nothing, stands abandoned in a Goodwill parking lot by her son Marcus, who prioritizes his elite ambitions over family. As Marcus distances himself, embracing a polished persona at Princeton, Beverly discovers her late grandmother Eleanor's $14 million estate, left to her with a condition: only family showing genuine love and respect may benefit. Devastated by Marcus's dismissive attitude, Beverly plans a test to reveal his true character. Will he prove his loyalty, or will his pursuit of status cost him everything? The answer promises a shocking twist. If Beverly and Marcus's story resonated with you, join our community. Subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt narratives that explore family, sacrifice, and redemption. Click below to stay updated with exclusive stories and share where you're tuning in from. Your support means the world to us. If Beverly and Marcus's story resonated with you, join our community. Subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt narratives that explore family, sacrifice, and redemption. Click below to stay updated with exclusive stories and share where you're tuning in from. Your support means the world to us. The rain stung my face, mingling with the mascara I could feel streaking down my cheeks, but I barely noticed. My heart was too heavy, my mind too tangled in the unraveling of a truth I'd spent years dodging. Marcus, my only son, the boy I'd raised alone through sleepless nights and endless sacrifices, had left me standing in this desolate parking lot, abandoned like the worn-out trinkets in the box I held. I'd always told myself that family was unbreakable, that the love we'd built over decades, through poverty, triumphs, and quiet moments of joy, couldn't just dissolve. But standing there, shivering under the gray sky, I felt something inside me crack, like ice on a frozen lake, trembling under pressure but not yet shattered. It wasn't just hurt. It was the dawning awareness that I'd been blind to the slow erosion of his respect, his love, his need for me. For months, maybe years, the signs had been there, flickering like warning lights I'd chosen to ignore. The clipped phone calls, the canceled dinners, the way his eyes darted away when I spoke, as if my presence was an inconvenience he couldn't quite shake. I'd explained it away, stress from his high-powered job, the weight of his new life, the demands of a world I'd never fully understood. But deep down, I knew. Love blinds you, wraps you in a cocoon of hope that lets you justify the small cruelties, the dismissals, the gradual drift. You tell yourself it's temporary, that family endures. I was wrong, and that truth, cold and sharp, cut deeper than the rain ever could. I'd given Marcus everything. As a single mother, I'd clawed my way up from nothing, building a life for us out of sheer will. I was 22 when his father vanished, leaving me with a toddler who shared his dark eyes and a pile of unpaid bills. Back then, I worked double shifts at Mel's Diner on Route 9, my feet aching as I poured coffee and memorized orders, coming home to a cramped apartment above a laundromat where the hum of machines and neighbors' arguments bled through the walls. But in that tiny space, Marcus and I created a world of our own. Sunday mornings meant pancake breakfast, made from the cheapest mix I could afford, but to us, they were feasts. Movie nights on our $30 secondhand couch were sacred, the two of us curled up with a bowl of popcorn, whispering silly commentary to keep from waking the neighbors. Those moments were our fortress, proof that love could make even the leanest years feel rich. Marcus was a bright spark, even as a child. By 3, he could count to 100, his little voice ringing with pride. At 4, he'd read picture books to me at bedtime, his tiny finger tracing each word with care. Teachers adored him, his curiosity, his politeness, the thoughtful questions he'd ask with a raised hand. Other parents would stop me at school events, marveling at how well-mannered he was, how articulate. "You're doing something right, Beverly," they'd say, and I'd glow with pride, knowing that despite our tight budget and discount store clothes, I was giving him something priceless. The unshakable certainty that he was loved, valued, worth every sacrifice. Those early years were grueling, but they were ours. When Marcus lost his first tooth, I turned it into a grand adventure, slipping quarters and a handwritten note from the tooth fairy under his pillow. When nightmares woke him, I'd climb into his twin bed, weaving stories of brave boys who outsmarted dragons with cleverness and kind hearts. For his 7th birthday, he wanted a bicycle, a shiny red one from the local shop. I worked extra shifts for 2 months, saving every tip, my body aching, but my heart full. On Christmas morning, when he saw it propped against our little tree, his face lit up with a joy that made every late night worth it. That moment, his arms around me, his voice declaring, "Mama, you're the best in the whole world," was my treasure, my proof that we were enough. I had dreams beyond the diner, ambitions that burned brighter as Marcus grew. At night, after he was asleep, I'd study business at the community college, sketching restaurant floor plans on napkins during slow shifts at Mel's. I imagined owning a place, Beverly's Kitchen, where the food was hearty, the atmosphere warm, and every customer felt like family. Marcus would sit at our kitchen table doing homework while I pored over textbooks, occasionally looking up to ask what I was learning. I'd explain profit margins or customer service, and he'd nod, his dark eyes serious, as if he understood I was building something bigger for us both. "When you have your restaurant, Mama, I'll be your best customer," he'd say, and my heart would swell, fueled by his belief in me. When Marcus was 8, I took the leap. After 6 years at Mel's, I knew waitressing was a dead end. The diner hadn't changed since the 70s, with its cracked vinyl booths and finicky coffee machines. I wanted more, for me, for Marcus, who was starting to notice our stretched grocery budget and hand-me-down clothes. I'd saved $3,000, every cent scraped together from double shifts and careful scrimping. It wasn't much, but it was enough to rent a small cafe space downtown, near the courthouse and community college. I spent weeks crafting a business plan, calculating costs, my hands shaking with fear and excitement. When I told Marcus about Beverly's Kitchen, his eyes sparkled like they had on that Christmas morning. "You'll be the boss, Mama?" he asked. And when I nodded, he hugged me tight, declaring, "I always knew you'd be somebody important." We celebrated with ice cream for dinner, dreaming aloud about a kids' menu with pictures and a cozy corner for families to read together. Opening Beverly's Kitchen was a whirlwind of terror and exhilaration. The first months were relentless. 18-hour days of cooking, serving, cleaning, and bookkeeping, and all on my own because hiring help was a distant dream. Marcus would come after school, doing homework at a corner table, his presence a quiet anchor in the chaos. I poured my soul into that place, determined to make it a success, not just for me, but for the future I wanted for us. But now, standing in that Goodwill parking lot, the memory of those dreams felt like a cruel echo. Marcus, the boy who once thought I hung the moon, had left me here, disposable. The hurt was raw, but beneath it something else stirred. A resolve, cold and steady. What Marcus didn't know, what no one knew except my lawyer and accountant, was that I'd been planning something for months. A reckoning, a lesson in what it means to abandon someone who gave you everything. Because when someone shows you who they are, you believe them. And sometimes you have to show them who you are too. As the dinner rush loomed, I'd find Marcus tucked into the corner table at Beverly's Kitchen, his small frame bent over a notebook, or chatting with customers who'd grown fond of his bright smile and polite charm. He wasn't just my son, he was the heart of the place, our unofficial mascot. Regulars would ask for Marcus' table, slipping him quarters when he cleared their plates or topped off their water glasses with a seriousness that made him glow with pride. Those small gestures meant the world to him, and to me, they were proof that we were building something special together. Slowly, the restaurant started to thrive. Word got around about our homemade pies, the kind that made you close your eyes with every bite, the generous portions that left no one hungry, and the warmth that made every guest feel like they'd come home. Local business people began booking lunch meetings, drawn by the buzz of a place that felt alive. College students flocked to our daily specials, their laughter filling the air as they stretched their budgets for a taste of comfort. Families chose us for birthdays and anniversaries, their celebrations weaving into the fabric of our little world. Within a year, I could afford to hire 2 part-time servers and a weekend cook. By the second year, I was dreaming of expanding the space, imagining a bigger dining room filled with more faces, more stories. Marcus was my biggest cheerleader in those days, his pride in me as bright as the neon sign outside. He'd brag to his teachers that his mama ran the best restaurant in town, his chest puffed out like he was talking about a grand empire. After school, he'd bring friends by, showing off the place like it was a castle, his eyes sparkling as he pointed out the polished countertops or the framed photos on the walls. For career day, he insisted I come to his class, and I showed up in my best dress, nervous but determined, explaining to a room of wide-eyed 9-year-olds how you could start with nothing but a dream and build something extraordinary through grit and heart. Standing there watching Marcus beam from the front row, I felt like we were unstoppable, a team bound by love and shared purpose. Every night we'd close up together, him carefully stacking bills and coins while I tallied the day's sales, his small hands moving with the precision of a banker. He'd taste test new recipes, furrowing his brow like a Michelin star critic, offering feedback so earnest it made my heart ache. When customers raved about the food or the service, Marcus soaked it in as if the praise was his own, and in a way it was. He was as much a part of Beverly's kitchen as the recipes I'd perfected or the tables I'd scrubbed spotless. I started saving for his college fund, tucking away money each month without fail, dreaming of him at a top university, studying business, law, or whatever sparked his curiosity. I wanted him to see a world without limits, to know that he could chase any dream because I'd shown him what was possible. Those were golden years, filled with a closeness that felt unbreakable. Marcus understood that everything I was building, the long hours, the sleepless nights, was for us, for the future we'd share. I'd lie awake sometimes picturing him walking across the stage in a cap and gown, his smile as wide as it had been at that corner table, knowing I'd given him a foundation to stand on. By the time Marcus hit middle school, Beverly's Kitchen had become a cornerstone of our small town. The local paper wrote us up, calling us a hidden gem, and a regional magazine featured us in a spread about must-visit spots. The recognition felt like a warm embrace from the community we'd served. I bought us a small house with a real yard, a place where Marcus could kick a soccer ball or ride his bike without worry. For the first time, we had stability, a home in a safe neighborhood with good schools, a life that felt like it could last. Marcus was thriving too. He made the honor roll every semester, joined the school soccer team, and gathered a tight-knit group of friends who'd pile into our living room on weekends, devouring snacks and playing video games until the house hummed with their energy. I loved having them around, those lanky 12 and 13-year-olds who called me Mrs. Anderson and raved about my cooking. They treated our home like a sanctuary, and I cherished being the mom who knew their favorite chips and asked about their dreams. Marcus would roll his eyes when I fussed over his friends, but I could see the pride in his smirk. He loved that our house was the place everyone wanted to be. Looking back, though, I see the shift starting in those middle school years. So subtle, I barely noticed it. Success changes things, especially when you're young and the world starts to feel bigger than the one you've always known. As Beverly's Kitchen grew, as our life got steadier, Marcus began to take for granted the miracles we'd once celebrated. He stopped coming to the restaurant after school, choosing instead to hang out at friends' houses or lose himself in video games. When I asked him to join me for dinner at the restaurant, he'd groan, saying he was tired of restaurant food and just wanted to eat at home like a normal family. Those words cut deep, sharper than he could have known. I'd poured everything into giving him normal, stability, a mother who was there, a home filled with love. But to him, normal meant something else, something I couldn't quite grasp. The first real crack came during his 8th grade graduation dinner. I'd planned a big celebration at Beverly's Kitchen, inviting his friends and their family, cooking all his favorite dishes. Mac and cheese with extra cheddar, fried chicken that crunched just right, and a custom cake with his picture and "Congratulations, Marcus" in blue frosting. I'd spent weeks planning, my heart swelling with the thought of making this moment perfect for him. But that night, Marcus was distant, his politeness to the guests feeling forced. He barely looked at me, as if he was already slipping away from the world we'd built. After everyone left, as we wiped down the table side by side, I asked if he'd had fun. He shrugged, his voice flat. "It was fine, Mom, but next time can we just go to a real restaurant?" The words hit like a punch to the chest. A real restaurant? Beverly's Kitchen, the place I'd built from nothing, the place that had given us this life, wasn't real enough for him. I wanted to sit him down, to remind him of the nights we'd counted quarters to make rent, The days we dreamed of a place like this. But I was too hurt, too tired. I told myself it was just teenage moodiness, that he'd outgrow it. I convinced myself that a little spoiling from Socanto was better than the struggles we'd left behind. I was wrong. High school brought a wider gulf between us. Marcus got into an accelerated academic program, surrounded by kids whose parents were doctors, lawyers, CEOs, people who wore their wealth like a second skin. Suddenly, our hard-earned success felt small to him, dwarfed by their effortless privilege. He started talking about private schools, saying our public school wasn't challenging enough, that his smart friends were aiming for elite universities with price tags that made my head spin. I pushed myself harder, expanding Beverly's Kitchen again, adding catering services, booking weddings and corporate events. The money was better than I'd ever dreamed when I was waitressing at Mel's Diner, but the work swallowed me whole. Marcus didn't need me to drive him to school or help with homework anymore. Our talks became transactional. Money for this, a ride to that, pizza or home for dinner. I told myself this was normal, that teenagers pull away to find themselves. I believed our foundation was strong enough to hold through this storm. I was wrong about that too. The moment that broke my heart came in his junior year. Marcus got invited to a party at the home of a classmate, Chelsea, whose father owned a chain of car dealerships. When I dropped him off, I couldn't stop staring at their house. A sprawling colonial with a circular driveway and gardens that looked like they belonged in a magazine. It was beautiful, intimidating, a world I'd only ever driven past. When I picked him up that night, Marcus was quiet, his mood heavy. I asked about the party, if he'd had fun, if the parents were kind. He mumbled vague answers until we pulled into our driveway. Then, in a voice that carried the weight of his new world, he said, "Mom, when people ask what you do, can you just say you're in food service? You don't have to mention you own a restaurant." The words hung between us like a poison cloud. Food service. As if Beverly's Kitchen, the heart of everything we'd built, was something to hide. As if my life's work, the pride of our community, the foundation of his opportunities, was an embarrassment in front of his wealthy friends. I turned off the car and looked at him in the dim porch light, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. "Marcus, is there something wrong with owning a restaurant?" He sighed, a teenager's exasperated huff, as if I was the one missing the point. The sting of my son's words lingered like a bruise I couldn't stop pressing. "It's not wrong, Mom," Marcus had said, his voice casual, almost dismissive. "It's just that these people's parents are lawyers, surgeons, business executives. They have, important jobs." Important jobs. The phrase echoed in my mind, sharp and cutting, as if the life I'd built, feeding families, creating a warm haven for our community, employing a dozen people, and clawing our way out of poverty, was somehow trivial. As if the restaurant, Beverly's Kitchen, which had transformed our lives from food stamps and secondhand clothes to stability and opportunity, was something to brush aside. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders, to shake him and remind him of the lessons I'd spent years instilling, that hard work carried its own dignity, that a person's worth wasn't measured by their bank account, that the sweat and sacrifice of building something from nothing deserved respect. But the words caught in my throat, choked by a wave of hurt so raw it left me speechless. Instead, I managed a weak nod and murmured, "Okay, honey, if that's what you prefer." My voice sounded foreign, small, like it belonged to someone else. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the darkness pressing against me. The house was quiet, but my mind churned with questions that refused to settle. When had I become someone my son was ashamed of? When had the woman he'd once called his hero, the one he'd bragged about to anyone who'd listen, become an embarrassment? When had the life we'd built together through late nights, early mornings, and every ounce of grit I could muster, become something he wanted to distance himself from? The answer was dawning on me, heavy and unwelcome. Success had changed Marcus in ways I hadn't seen coming. It wasn't just the money or the opportunities, it was the circles he now moved in, where wealth was inherited, not earned, where status came from family names and trust funds, not personal triumphs. In that world, A woman who'd pulled herself up from waitressing to owning a restaurant wasn't a success story. She was new money, working class, someone who'd gotten lucky but didn't truly belong. And Marcus, my brilliant, driven son, was desperate to belong in that world, even if it meant leaving me behind. Still, I clung to hope. I believed our bond, forged through years of shared struggles and small victories, was unbreakable. I thought the foundation we'd built, late nights helping with homework, mornings driving him to academic competitions, the pride in his eyes when he told everyone I was the smartest woman in the world, would hold strong against the pressures of teenage social climbing. I was determined to keep fighting for him, to show him that success born of hard work was nothing to be ashamed of, that family loyalty outweighed any fleeting status. I thought I had time to pull him back, to remind him of who we were and where we'd come from. I was wrong. Senior year arrived, bringing with it the weight of impending adulthood and a frenetic energy that consumed Marcus. He threw himself into college preparations with an intensity that felt less like ambition and more like an escape. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, the names fell from his lips like sacred incantations, spoken with a reverence he'd never shown for our family or the restaurant. He spent hours poring over college websites, memorizing acceptance rates and SAT score averages, studying photos of ivy-covered buildings and pristine quads as if they were holy sites. I supported his dreams, of course. What mother wouldn't want her child to aim for the stars? But there was something unsettling in his pursuit, a desperation that went beyond aspiration. He wasn't just chasing a prestigious degree. He was chasing a new identity, one that didn't include a mother who came home smelling of French fry oil or a family history marked by cereal dinners and nights when the fridge was empty until payday. The college application process became a battlefield of small wounds. When Marcus asked me to review his personal essay, I was eager, expecting to see our story woven into his words. Our journey from struggles to triumph, the partnership that had carried us through. But as I read, my heart sank. The essay was polished, eloquent, a masterfully crafted narrative of a young man who'd overcome adversity through sheer determination and intellectual brilliance. I appeared only as a shadow in the background, a vague figure who'd provided the bare necessities while he'd essentially raised himself. There was no mention of Beverly's kitchen, no nod to how the restaurant had lifted us out of poverty, no acknowledgement of the nights I'd stayed up helping with algebra or the weekends I'd driven him across the state for debate tournaments. In his telling, he was a self-made prodigy, his success blooming despite his humble roots, not because of the love and sacrifice that had nurtured it. I tried to be gentle when I pointed out the omissions, suggesting that our partnership, the restaurant's role in our lives, might be worth mentioning. Marcus's response was a flash of irritation, his eyes narrowing as if I'd missed the point entirely. "Mom, college admissions officers want to see independence and personal growth," he said, his tone clipped. "They don't care about family businesses or parental help. They want to know I can succeed on my own merit." On my own merit. The words landed like a slap, as if the stable home I'd fought to provide, the values I'd instilled, the opportunities I'd carved out through years of relentless work were irrelevant, as if acknowledging my role would somehow diminish his achievements rather than amplify them. I swallowed the hurt, forcing a smile. "The essay's wonderful, honey," I said. And it was, technically. It was sophisticated, designed to impress elite admissions committees. But it was also a deliberate erasure of our shared history, a carefully curated version of his life that cast him as the sole architect of his success. The college interviews only deepened the divide. Marcus prepared for them with the precision of a general planning a campaign, rehearsing answers, researching his interviewers' backgrounds, even buying new clothes to project the right image, polished, affluent, untethered to our working-class roots. When I offered to drive him to his first interview at a downtown coffee shop, he waved me off. "I'll take the bus, Mom. It looks more independent." When I suggested we grab lunch afterward to celebrate, he shook his head. "I'm meeting friends from school. We're going to compare notes on our interviews." Each rejection was small but sharp, like a splinter embedding itself deeper with every encounter. Marcus was systematically carving me out of his life's big moments, erecting boundaries where none had existed before, building a wall that grew taller with each passing week. The worst part was how reasonable his explanations always sounded. Of course, he needed to show independence to impress admissions officers. Of course, he wanted to debrief with peers who were navigating the same process. Of course, he was nervous and needed space to focus. Every exclusion was wrapped in logic so airtight, it made me feel small and selfish for wanting to be included. But beneath the rationality, I sensed something darker. Shame. Marcus was ashamed of me, of our life, of the journey we'd shared. He'd decided our story wasn't good enough for the world he wanted to join, that my presence in his narrative would somehow tarnish his chances of fitting into the elite circles he craved. When the acceptance letters arrived in March, Marcus's hard work paid off. Princeton, his top choice, welcomed him along with several other prestigious schools. I was genuinely thrilled, my pride in his academic achievements swelling despite the ache in my chest. But even this triumph was tinged with distance. He opened the Princeton letter alone in his room, and I only learned of his acceptance when I overheard him on the phone with his guidance counselor, his voice alive with excitement and in relief. When he finally came downstairs to share the news, his enthusiasm was muted, like he'd already processed the raw joy in private and was now offering me a polished, restrained version. "That's wonderful, honey," I said, pulling him into a hug. He returned it briefly, his arms loose, before stepping back. The moment felt like a transaction, not a celebration, and the distance between us was a chasm I didn't know how to cross. The news of Marcus's acceptance to Princeton filled the air with a bittersweet tang, like the scent of overripe fruit, promising yet tinged with the ache of something slipping away. I stood in the dim glow of Beverly's kitchen, the restaurant I'd poured my life into, its wooden tables scarred from years of service, its air heavy with the lingering aroma of roasted garlic and today's special, a hearty beef stew. My heart swelled with pride for my son, but it was laced with a quiet, gnawing sorrow I couldn't shake. Marcus had darted in briefly, his face alight with the glow of his achievement, before hesitating, his excitement dimming as he spoke. "We should celebrate," I said, my voice bright with forced enthusiasm, trying to mask the tremor of hope that we'd mark this milestone together. "Maybe we could close the restaurant early, head to that steakhouse you love, or throw a party here with your friends." I pictured a night filled with laughter, clinking glasses, in the warmth of shared triumph, our little family, our extended circle of loyal customers and employees, all toasting Marcus's bright future. But his expression faltered, a shadow crossing his face as he shifted uncomfortably. "Actually, Mom, Chelsea's parents are hosting a dinner for all the kids who got into Ivy League schools. It's tonight at their country club." His words landed like a stone in my chest, heavy and cold. He paused, his eyes avoiding mine, as if the weight of what came next was too much to bear. "It's kind of a formal thing, for students and their families." The implication hung between us, sharp and unspoken, slicing through the warmth of the moment. For students and their families, but not for me, not for us. I forced a smile, my lips trembling as I fought to keep the disappointment from spilling into my voice. "That sounds lovely," I said, my tone carefully measured. "What time should I be ready?" Marcus shifted his weight, his gaze fixed on the floor, his hands fidgeting with the edge of his jacket. "The thing is, Mom, it's really expensive. Like $200 a plate, and it's mostly for families who've been members of the country club for years." His voice trailed off, leaving the truth to fester in the silence. I understood what he couldn't say. This wasn't a place for people like us. Not for a single mother who had clawed her way up from nothing, building a life for us brick by brick through late nights at the restaurant. Not for a family whose wealth was measured in sweat and sacrifice rather than inherited privilege or country club memberships. The rejection stung, not just because I wasn't invited, but because Marcus didn't want me there. He was protecting himself, shielding our differences from the polished world he was stepping into. A world where my calloused hands, in the faint scent of kitchen grease clinging to my clothes, would mark us as outsiders. I swallowed the hurt, forcing another smile. "Of course," I said, my voice softer now, almost a whisper. "You should go. It's a wonderful opportunity to celebrate with your classmates." Relief washed over his face, as if he'd been bracing for a fight, for tears, for the weight of my disappointment to anchor him in place. Thanks, Mom. I knew you'd understand. His gratitude felt like a pat on the head, a consolation for being left behind. Maybe we could do something tomorrow night, just the two of us. He offered, but the words rang hollow, a second-place prize to soften the blow of my exclusion from the real celebration. I nodded, telling him it sounded perfect, but the word felt like ash in my mouth. I excused myself to my bedroom, the restaurant's familiar hum fading behind me as I closed the door. Alone, I let the sting of rejection settle, hot tears prickling my eyes as I sank onto the edge of the bed. I'd always imagined this moment, Marcus's acceptance to an Ivy League school, as a shared victory, a culmination of our partnership. I'd pictured us raising glasses of champagne, calling aunts and uncles to share the joy, maybe even hosting a special dinner at the restaurant, surrounded by the people who'd watched him grow. Instead, his success felt like the first step in a separation I hadn't seen coming. That night, while Marcus mingled at the country club with families who moved effortlessly in their elite circles, I sat alone in Beverly's kitchen and after closing. The restaurant was silent, its empty tables stretching out like a mirror of my solitude. The air still carried the faint warmth of the day's cooking, a reminder of the countless nights I'd worked late, saving every penny for Marcus's college fund. I thought of the dreams I'd nurtured, his graduation, his future, the pride of watching him become the brilliant young man he was today. But I hadn't anticipated that his triumph would carve a chasm between us, that his entry into a new world would leave me standing on the outside, peering in. The summer before college was supposed to be our time, a precious window to savor before he left for Princeton. I'd planned to cut back my hours at the restaurant, maybe take a trip together, help him pack for this new chapter. I imagined lazy mornings cooking breakfast side by side, or evenings spent laughing over old movies, the kind of moments we'd always cherished. But Marcus had other plans. He'd secured an internship at a prestigious law firm in the city, arranged through the father of one of his wealthy classmates. He'd be living in a furnished apartment near the firm, spending most of the summer away from home. "It's an incredible opportunity, Mom," he'd said, his voice brimming with excitement when he broke the news. "I'll be working with real lawyers, sitting in on client meetings, getting actual experience in corporate law. This could be huge for my resume." His enthusiasm was infectious, and I was proud, fiercely proud of his drive, his ambition, the way he'd seized such a competitive opportunity. But beneath that pride, a quiet ache bloomed. He'd made these plans without me, without even a conversation. He'd chosen the city, the firm, the glittering promise of a new world over the summer we could have spent together. When I suggested he might commute from home or work part-time to carve out space for us, his expression shifted, a mix of incredulity and frustration, as if I'd proposed he throw away his future. "Mom, this isn't some summer job at the restaurant," he said, the words cutting deeper than he likely intended. "This is a professional opportunity with one of the most respected law firms in the state. I need to take it seriously, be fully committed. Living in the city is part of the experience." The comparison to the restaurant, my restaurant, our foundation, felt like a dismissal of everything we'd built. Beverly's Kitchen wasn't just a business, it was the heart of our life together. It was where Marcus had learned to bus tables as a kid, where he'd absorbed lessons about hard work, about treating everyone with dignity, no matter their status. It was the source of his college fund, the late nights that paid for his SAT prep courses, his textbooks, his dreams. But to him, it had become a symbol of limitation, a small-town anchor he was eager to cast off. He left for the city in early June, promising to visit on weekends when his schedule allowed. The house felt cavernous without him, its silence echoing the emptiness of those early years when I'd raised him alone, a single mother navigating the weight of responsibility. But this silence was different, sharper, laced with the sting of rejection rather than the simple loneliness of his childhood naps or school days. When he did come home, he was different, distracted, impatient, as if his real life was unfolding elsewhere, and these visits were a courtesy, a box to check. He'd sleep late, his phone or laptop claiming most of his attention, His responses to my questions polite but distant, like updates you'd offer a well-meaning acquaintance. I tried to bridge the gap, suggesting things we used to love, cooking elaborate meals together, watching old movies, strolling through the farmer's market. He'd agree, but his enthusiasm felt perfunctory, like he was humoring me. "How's the internship going?" I'd ask, genuinely curious about his new world. "It's great, Mom. Really challenging. I'm learning so much about corporate law and client relations," he'd reply. His answers vague, polished, the kind you'd give to someone who couldn't possibly understand. When I asked about the other interns, whether he'd made friends, he said, "Yeah, they're cool. Most of them are from really good schools, Harvard, Yale, Princeton. It's nice to be around people who understand the academic pressure." The words landed like a slap, as if I hadn't been there for every late-night study session, every tear shed over a tough math problem, every moment of doubt when he wondered if he was enough, as if my encouragement, my sacrifices, my unwavering belief in him paled in comparison to the camaraderie of his privileged peers. The hardest moment came in late July during one of his fleeting weekend visits. I'd made his favorite meal, pot roast with creamy mashed potatoes and crisp green beans, the comfort food he'd always craved when life felt heavy. As we sat at the kitchen table, the familiar clink of forks against plates filling the quiet, I asked about his plans for the rest of the summer and the fall. "Well, after the internship ends, I'll probably stay in the city for a few weeks," he said, his tone casual, as if it were a given. "Some of the other interns are planning to travel together before school starts. Then I'll need to get to Princeton early for orientation and freshman seminars." I set down my fork, the weight of his words sinking in. "So you won't be coming home between the internship and school?" I asked, my voice steady despite the tightness in my chest. "Probably not, Mom. It just doesn't make sense logistically. Besides, I need to start getting used to being independent, right? College is going to be a big adjustment." Independence. The word felt like a blade slicing through the bond we'd built over 18 years. As if coming home to the place where he'd been loved, supported, celebrated, would somehow stunt his growth. As if our shared history was a weight to shed rather than a foundation to carry forward. "Of course," I said, forcing my voice to remain even. "You're probably right. It's important to start that transition gradually." But inside, I was unraveling. Marcus was telling me, in his gentle, indirect way, that our relationship, our home, our life together was something he needed to practice living without. That independence meant distance from me, not the confident adulthood I'd hoped to nurture. After dinner, as he packed to return to the city, I stood in his doorway watching him fold clothes and gather belongings. His room, once a sanctuary filled with his books, his photos, his childhood treasures, felt like a stranger's space, temporary and impersonal. The boy who'd once run to me with every triumph and heartbreak, Oye was slipping away, stepping into a world where I didn't belong. And as I watched him zip up his bag, I wondered if this was the price of his success. A future where our love, our history, our shared dreams would be relegated to the margins, a footnote in the story he was writing without me. The remnants of Marcus's childhood were already tucked away in cardboard boxes, as though he were methodically wiping away any trace of his life in our small town. I stood in the doorway of his room, my heart heavy with a quiet ache, and murmured, "Marcus, you know you can always come back home, don't you? No matter where life takes you, no matter how far you go or how much you achieve, this place, this house, this family will always be your anchor." My voice trembled with the weight of unspoken fears, the kind only a mother knows when she senses her child slipping into a world beyond her reach. He paused, his hands stilling over a half-packed duffel bag, and for a fleeting moment, I caught a glimpse of the boy he used to be, the one who'd scramble into my bed during thunderstorms, his small body trembling against mine, seeking safety in my arms. But that vulnerability vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the guarded, polite distance that had become his shield in our interactions. "I know, Mom. Thanks," he said, his tone soft but clipped, like a door gently closing. He zipped up his bag with a finality that stung, then offered me a brief hug, his arms barely lingering, before he pulled away. "I'll call you this week, okay?" he promised. but the words felt like a formality, a placeholder for a connection that was already fraying. As the summer wore on, those promise calls grew sparse, each one shorter and less substantial than the last. Our conversations, once rich with laughter and shared confidences, dwindled into the kind of shallow exchange you'd have with a distant acquaintance at a grocery store. He'd ask about the restaurant, how's business, any new dishes, and I'd inquire about his internship, his colleagues, his plans. But we danced around anything that might crack open the growing chasm between us, steering clear of emotions or memories that might demand more than either of us was ready to give. Each call left me staring at the phone, my chest tight with the realization that Marcus wasn't just preparing to leave for college. He was rehearsing how to live a life that didn't include me. Every brief chat, every carefully measured response was a step toward a future where I was no longer central, perhaps not even necessary. He was crafting a delicate balance, just enough contact to avoid seeming cold, but never enough to let me glimpse the heart of who he was becoming. The weekend before he left for Princeton, Marcus returned home to pack up the last fragments of his life here and officially step into his new role as a college student, a visitor rather than a resident. I clung to the hope that these final days might offer a chance to bridge the distance, to sit together and talk about what this transition meant, to share tears or laughter or even a quiet acknowledgement of the milestone. I imagined us poring over old photo albums, reminiscing about the vacations and late-night diner talks that had defined our bond. Instead, the visit felt transactional, as though Marcus were executing a checklist rather than savoring a farewell. He moved through the house with a detached precision, sorting his belongings like an appraiser at an auction. Keep, donate, discard. His childhood books, dog-eared novels and picture books we'd read together under blanket forts, were stacked in the donation pile without a second glance. Middle school soccer trophies, once displayed with pride, were tossed into a trash bag. Photos of us, smiling at diners, posing by waterfalls, laughing on road trips, were sealed into a box and carried to the basement, as though they were relics of a life he no longer claimed. I picked up one photo, my fingers tracing the edges of a snapshot from a trip to Niagara Falls when he was 14. We were soaked from the mist, our faces lit with carefree joy, our arms slung around each other like we'd never let go. "Are you sure you don't want to take this?" I asked, my voice catching as I held it out to him. "It's a good one of us." He glanced at it, his expression unreadable, then shook his head. "Nah, Mom, I don't have much space in my dorm for stuff like that. Besides, I'll be making new memories at school." His words landed like a quiet blow, sharp and cold. New memories? As if the 18 years we'd woven together, every shared meal, every late night heart-to-heart, every triumphant tear, were obsolete, like last season's clothes cluttering a closet meant for finer things. I swallowed the hurt, forcing a smile, but inside I felt the sting of being relegated to the past, a chapter he was eager to close. On Sunday morning, I helped him load his car, my hands moving mechanically as I passed him boxes and bags. The trunk filled with items carefully chosen for his new life, designer clothes bought with his internship earnings, a sleek new laptop, textbooks for his fall courses, a few tasteful decor pieces to curate the image he wanted to project at Princeton. Each item felt like a deliberate rejection of the world we'd built together. No trace of our small-town roots, no hint of the son of a restaurant owner, nothing to tie him to me. As he slammed the trunk shut, I stood on the porch, my throat tight with unshed tears. This should have been a moment of pride, a celebration of his hard work and the boundless possibilities awaiting him. Instead, it felt like a eulogy, as though I were watching him bury the boy I'd raised to make way for a stranger I barely knew. "I'm so proud of you," I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. "You're going to do incredible things at Princeton." He nodded, his eyes meeting mine for a brief moment. "Thanks, Mom, for everything." His hug was quick, perfunctory, like a signature on a contract before walking away. As his car rounded the corner and disappeared, the truth settled over me like a heavy fog. Marcus hadn't just been preparing for college. He'd been preparing to leave me behind. Each small rejection a rehearsal for this final departure. The house felt hollow without him, each room echoing with memories he seemed determined to forget. I wandered through the silence, seeing our home through his eyes. A modest small-town house, a symbol of everything he wanted to escape. The kitchen table where we'd shared countless meals and conversations now felt like a relic, a reminder of a life he'd outgrown. That night, I sat there alone, a pen in hand, and poured my heart into a letter. I wrote of my pride in his achievements, my boundless love for him, my excitement for the adventures awaiting him. I told him that home would always be here, a refuge whenever he needed it, that our bond didn't have to be a weight holding him back, but a foundation to lift him higher. But as I sealed the envelope, I knew I wouldn't send it. Marcus didn't want my love or my grounding or my open arms. He wanted distance, freedom, the chance to forge a new identity unburdened by his past or by me. He wanted to become someone else, and that someone, it seemed, had no place for the mother who'd raised him. Princeton reshaped Marcus in ways I hadn't expected, though perhaps I should have. His rare calls during his first semester carried a new cadence, his words tinged with subtle shifts in pronunciation that made him sound like he was trying on a new persona. He'd always been well-spoken, but now his speech had a polished sheen, as though he were auditioning for a role in a world where his natural voice wasn't quite enough. Our conversations became cautious performances, each of us navigating an unspoken script. He'd ask about the restaurant with a detached courtesy, and I'd share updates about new recipes or staff changes, sensing his attention drifting. When I asked about his life, his classes, his professors, his friends, he offered vague, polished summaries that revealed nothing of his inner world. It was like speaking to a diplomat representing Marcus's life rather than Marcus himself. I poured my heart into preparing for his Thanksgiving visit, hoping it would be a chance to reconnect. I cooked his favorite dishes, hung autumn wreaths, planned cozy evenings that might draw us closer. But when Marcus stepped through the door, he carried himself like a guest in a stranger's home, not a son returning to his roots. He was leaner, his wardrobe a curated collection of expensive casual wear that screamed effortless sophistication. His hair was neatly styled, his posture rigid, as though he were constantly aware of an invisible audience. "The house looks the same," he said, his tone carrying a faint edge, as if sameness were a flaw. He moved through the rooms like a scholar studying artifacts of a life he'd left behind, his eyes skimming over familiar objects with detached curiosity. Dinner that night was strained, the silences stretching longer than the words. I peppered him with questions about his studies, his professors, his life at Princeton, desperate to find a thread to pull us closer. He answered politely but without warmth, his eyes flicking to his phone as though it held the promise of a more meaningful connection. "Tell me about your friends," I said, sliding another slice of lasagna onto his plate, hoping the comfort of his childhood might soften him. "Are you close with your roommate?" He shrugged, slicing his food with meticulous care. "Tyler's cool. His family has a place in the Hamptons. Nice guy." Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "He actually invited me to spend Christmas with them. They're skiing in Aspen, then heading to their place in Florida for New Year's." My fork froze halfway to my mouth, the words landing like a betrayal. "Christmas?" I echoed, my voice barely steady. "But we always spend Christmas together. It's our tradition." He avoided my gaze, his focus fixed on his plate. "I know, Mom, but it's a great opportunity. Tyler's dad is a federal judge and his uncle runs an investment firm. The networking could be amazing." Networking. The word felt like a blade, severing the sacred rituals of our past for the cold currency of ambition. I sat there, my heart splintering, wondering how the boy who'd raised, the one who'd helped me string Christmas lights and bake gingerbread, had become a stranger chasing connections over family. The sting of betrayal settled deep in my chest as Marcus announced he'd be spending the holidays with strangers, people he'd known for a mere 3 months, rather than the family who'd poured unconditional love into him for 19 years. My fork clinked against the plate, the sound sharp in the quiet kitchen, as a cold, heavy weight coiled in my stomach. I forced myself to speak, my voice steady despite the ache. "Of course, you should go if it's important to you," I said, each word jagged, like swallowing shards of glass. "We can celebrate when you get back." Marcus's face softened with relief, his shoulders relaxing as if he'd been holding his breath, expecting a fight. Thanks, Mom. I knew you'd understand, he said, his voice bright with gratitude. But I didn't understand, not really. I saw the truth in his eyes. He'd been ready to defend his choice, to justify abandoning the mother who'd worked double shifts to afford his school supplies, his sports uniforms, his Christmases filled with gifts she'd scrimped to buy. His relief cut deeper than his decision, revealing how little he thought of the life we'd built together, how eager he was to trade it for the polished world of his new friends. The rest of his Thanksgiving visit blurred into a haze of forced smiles and careful distance. Marcus buried himself in his laptop, claiming he was working on papers, but the muffled laughter from his video calls with college friends drifted into the kitchen where I sat, alone with my thoughts. His voice, now smooth and refined, carried fragments of conversations about spring break plans, internship applications, and campus social events. Each word spoken with the confidence of someone who'd already left our world behind. He belonged to that new life now, one where I was a footnote, a detail to be edited out. On Saturday morning, I suggested we visit Beverly's kitchen, the diner that had been a second home to us. I hoped the familiar booths and warm faces might stir something in him, some memory of the boy who'd once loved our life. Sure, Marcus agreed, but his enthusiasm was hollow, the kind you'd offer for a chore you couldn't avoid. At the diner, we sat in the corner booth where he'd spent countless afternoons doing homework through high school. The staff swarmed our table, their faces alight with joy at seeing him. Rosa, the cook who'd known him since he was a toddler, asked about college with pride shining in her eyes. Jimmy, the weekend server, teased him about old times, slipping in questions about his life now. These were people who'd watched Marcus grow, who'd snuck him extra cookies at 8, helped him wrestle algebra at 13, loved him without agenda or expectation. But Marcus met their warmth with a polite detachment that chilled me. His answers were rehearsed, clipped, the same polished responses he'd been giving me all week. When Rosa asked if he missed her cooking, he flashed a smile and said the college dining halls were surprisingly good, boasting about their variety as if her meals that had nourished him for years, were somehow lesser. When Jimmy asked if he was dating anyone, Marcus sidestepped with a vague comment about focusing on academics. I watched him perform this careful dance, deflecting their affection, and it hit me. He wasn't just pulling away from me. He was ashamed of everyone who tied him to his past, everyone who'd known the unfiltered version of him before he'd learned to mold himself for elite society. These people loved the boy he'd been, but Marcus was determined to erase that boy, to become someone new, someone who belonged in a world of status and privilege. Driving home through the familiar streets he had once biked along, Marcus was silent, his gaze fixed out the window. Then quietly he asked, "Mom, when people at school ask about home, what should I tell them about what you do?" The question landed like a punch, raw and unexpected. We'd had this talk years ago when he was younger, when I'd hoped he'd grow to see the dignity in my work. I'd thought college might teach him to value honest labor, to respect the life we'd built. Instead, he was asking me to help him rewrite our story. "Tell them whatever feels right to you," I said, my voice measured, though my heart pounded with hurt. "It's just, most of my friends' parents are in finance, law, medicine, professional careers," he said, his tone careful, almost apologetic. "The restaurant thing is harder to explain." The restaurant thing. The words sliced through me. Beverly's Kitchen wasn't a thing. It was a business I built from nothing, a place that had provided for his every need, his clothes, his education, his opportunities. It was a testament to resilience, to creating something real in a world that often demanded conformity. But to Marcus, it was an embarrassment, a detail to be smoothed over, less impressive than the trust funds or pedigreed professions of his friends' parents. "You could say I'm an entrepreneur," I offered, keeping my voice steady, "that I built a successful food service business from the ground up." He nodded slowly as if testing the word. "Yeah, entrepreneur sounds good." "Better than what?" I wanted to ask. "Better than restaurant owner? Better than the truth?" When had our life, our shared journey of sacrifice and triumph, become something to improve upon? Something insufficient for the world he was chasing? That Sunday, as I helped him pack to return to school, I looked at him and saw a stranger. This polished young man, with his careful words and guarded smiles, bore only a faint resemblance to the boy who'd once been my partner in life. That boy had been proud of our restaurant, thrilled by our small victories, fiercely protective of our bond. This Marcus was erasing him, scrubbing away every trace of the life we'd shared. As he drove off, I stood on the porch, waving, and felt something inside me wither. Not my love for him, which would always burn fierce and unyielding, but my hope. Hope that we could find our way back to each other. Hope that college might teach him to value authenticity over status. Hope that he'd one day see the beauty in what we'd built together. Christmas was the loneliest day of my life. For decades, I'd woven holiday traditions around Marcus, elaborate meals, carefully chosen gifts, quiet moments of connection that had anchored us. Without him, the day felt hollow, like a stage set for a play with no audience. I went through the motions, unwrapping a single gift I'd bought myself, cooking a small meal I barely tasted, watching holiday movies that only deepened the ache of better times. When Marcus called that evening from his friend Tyler's family home in Aspen, his voice was bright, alive with the thrill of skiing and the buzz of his new chosen family. Laughter and conversation hummed in the background, a stark contrast to the silence of my house. He asked how my day had been, and I lied, painting a picture of a quiet but pleasant celebration. I didn't tell him about the hours I'd spent crying or how his empty chair at the dinner table felt like a silent accusation. I didn't tell him how utterly I'd failed to matter enough for him to want to be here. Spring semester brought new layers of distance. Marcus had pledged an exclusive fraternity, and his calls were filled with stories of formal dinners, alumni networking events, and spring break trips to private islands owned by his fraternity brothers' families. When I offered to help with the costs, he brushed me off, saying the fraternity's social fund, bankrolled by wealthy alumni and parents, covered everything. He didn't need my help anymore. He'd found patrons who could offer opportunities I couldn't, and their generosity, tied to status and connections, seemed to mean more to him than the support I'd poured my life into providing. The rejection stung, but the implication that their charity outshone my sacrifices cut deeper. Spring break passed without a visit home. Marcus had been invited on a Caribbean sailing trip with his fraternity brothers, an educational opportunity to network with successful alumni and learn about international business. When I suggested he come home, even for a few days, he explained the trip's value with the same calculated tone he used for everything now. Every choice, every experience, was justified by its potential to advance his career, not by its joy or the relationships it might nurture. He was living like a strategist, plotting a path to success with no room for family, loyalty, or simple connection. When summer arrived, I let myself hope that time away from the pressure of Princeton might remind Marcus of who he'd been before he'd learned to be ashamed of his roots. But that hope crumbled when he announced he'd secured another opportunity, a summer internship that would keep him away, chasing the next rung on the ladder of elite success. The boy I'd raised, the one who'd once seen our life as enough, was gone, replaced by someone who saw our past as something to escape. My son, Marcus, had secured a coveted internship at a top-tier investment firm in Manhattan, a golden opportunity arranged through the web of connections he'd carefully spun during his time at university. When he called me, his voice buzzing with excitement during one of our increasingly fleeting conversations, he could hardly contain himself. "This is a step up from last summer, Mom," he said, his words brimming with ambition. "I'll be shadowing portfolio managers, diving into the intricacies of high-stakes financial strategies and the networking possibilities. They're unreal." His enthusiasm was palpable, but it carried a sharp edge, cutting through the warmth I longed to feel. It was always about networking, always about climbing the next rung on the ladder of success. Never about the simple joy of coming home, of sitting across from me at the kitchen table, of remembering the roots that anchored him, the family who had loved him fiercely from the very beginning. The internship came with a shared apartment in the heart of Manhattan, where Marcus would live alongside other interns from elite universities, young men and women all racing toward glittering careers in finance, law, or consulting. They were a different breed, these peers of his, who seemed to view wealth and privilege as their birthright, who saw summer internships at prestigious firms not as hard-earned opportunities, but as inevitable stepping stones. Marcus was stepping into a world far removed from the one we'd shared, surrounded by people who didn't know the sacrifices it took to get him there. He came home for a mere 3 days between his sophomore year and the start of the internship, just long enough to grab his summer wardrobe and tie up a few loose ends. Those 3 days felt like a fleeting shadow of what I'd hoped for. He was physically present, but his mind was elsewhere, tethered to his phone, making plans for weekends in the Hamptons, discussing apartment shares for his junior year, and comparing notes on internships with friends who spoke the same language of ambition. I tried to reach him, to spark a real conversation about his dreams, his fears, his experiences at school, but he met my efforts with polite detachment. His responses were rehearsed, carefully measured, as if he'd crafted a separate persona just for me, one that fulfilled the role of dutiful son, but revealed nothing of the young man he was becoming. It was like talking to a stranger who wore my son's face, his words polished but hollow, designed to keep me at arm's length. The morning of his departure was my last chance to bridge the growing chasm between us. I woke early, my heart heavy with hope, and prepared a breakfast of all his childhood favorites: fluffy pancakes, crispy bacon, fresh orange juice squeezed by hand. I set the table with our best dishes, arranged a small vase of wildflowers, and allowed myself to believe that this gesture, this labor of love, might crack the wall he'd built. But when Marcus came downstairs, already dressed for the journey, his eyes flicked to the spread with a flicker of discomfort, not gratitude. "Mom, you didn't have to go through all this trouble," he said, his voice tinged with something that felt like embarrassment. "I'm not really hungry, and I've got to hit the road soon." I swallowed the lump in my throat, hating the pleading tone in my voice as I said, "I just thought we could have a nice breakfast together before you go. We haven't had much time to talk since you have been home." He sat down reluctantly, taking a small helping of scrambled eggs and picking at them while scrolling through his phone. I tried to draw him out, asking about his summer plans, his courses for the fall, anything to coax him into a real moment of connection. But his answers were vague, his attention elsewhere. Desperation clawed at me, and I finally blurted out, "Marcus, I feel like we're drifting apart, like I don't even know you anymore. I miss you. I miss us." He looked up, his expression a mix of irritation and exhaustion. "Mom, I'm fine. Everything's fine. You don't need to worry about me or try to control my life. I'm an adult now." His words stung, sharp and dismissive. "I'm not trying to control you," I said, my voice trembling. "I just want to be part of your life." He sighed, his tone softening but still distant. "You are part of it, Mom. Just because I'm not here all the time doesn't mean we're not close." But we weren't close. The truth hung heavy between us, unspoken but undeniable. We were two people bound by history, performing the roles of mother and son without the warmth that once defined us. In a moment of raw vulnerability, I whispered, "Sometimes I feel like you're ashamed of me." The words slipped out before I could stop them, and I regretted them instantly. But they were true. Marcus set down his fork, his eyes meeting mine with something that might have been pity. "Mom, this isn't about you," he said, his voice firm. "This is about me building my own life, becoming my own person. You can't take everything so personally." The words cut deeper than he could know. How could I not take it personally? My son, the boy I'd raised through countless sacrifices, was pulling away, carefully erasing the parts of his story that tied him to me, to our modest life, to the mother who had poured everything into giving him a chance at something better. I pressed on, unable to stop myself. "I've worked so hard to give you opportunities I never had," I said, my voice breaking. "I've sacrificed everything so you could have choices. I just want to feel like that matters to you." He nodded, his expression softening slightly, but his words were rote, like a script he'd rehearsed. "Of course it matters, Mom. I'm grateful for everything you've done. But that doesn't mean I owe you my whole life. I have to make my own way now." And with that, he was gone, leaving behind a kitchen filled with the remnants of a breakfast I'd poured my heart into. The eggs sat untouched, cold and congealed, the bacon greasy and forgotten, the wildflowers already drooping in the summer heat. It felt like a cruel mirror of our relationship, my efforts to nurture something beautiful, now wilting under the weight of his indifference. That summer stretched endlessly, each day a quiet ache. Marcus called occasionally, his updates brief and impersonal, like checking off a boss on a to-do list. The internship was going well, he said. He was learning a lot. His fellow interns were driven and impressive. When I asked for details about his work, his apartment, his life, he deflected with vague responses that left me grasping at shadows. I began to see it clearly. Marcus wasn't just seeking independence. He was crafting a new identity, one that had no place for the life we'd shared. He was becoming someone who had never lived above a laundromat, never counted pennies for groceries, never had a mother who came home smelling of diner grease after a double shift. He wasn't rejecting me out of cruelty, but out of necessity, as if acknowledging his roots would unravel the polished persona he was building to fit into the elite world he now inhabited. When fall arrived, the distance between us deepened. Marcus had been accepted into a prestigious study abroad program in London, a year-long opportunity he described as a career-defining milestone. During one of our rare phone calls, he spoke with clinical precision about the academic prestige and the connections he'd forged, never once mentioning the fact that it meant we wouldn't see each other for nearly a year. This is the kind of thing that sets you apart in international finance, Fumi said, his voice brimming with purpose. The people I'll meet in London could open doors for me. Always the future, always the career, never the present moment or the mother who had loved him through every step of his journey. When I dared to ask if he'd considered staying closer to home, spending some of his college years with family, his response was sharp, laced with impatience. Mom, you can't seriously expect me to turn down an opportunity like this for sentimental reasons. This is my career we're talking about. Sentimental reasons. The phrase landed like a slap, reducing 2 decades of love and sacrifice to mere nostalgia, as if our bond was a trivial thing to be brushed aside in the name of ambition. The final blow came in November, during a phone call that began with a spark of hope. Marcus sounded genuinely excited, his voice warmer than it had been in months. I have amazing news, Mom, he said. And for a moment, I let myself believe it was something that might include me, something that might bridge the gap between us. Tyler's family invited me to spend Christmas with them again, but this time in Switzerland. His dad has business connections there, and I'll get to meet some incredible people. His excitement was a knife twisting in my chest. Another holiday, another moment that should have been ours, handed over to a world that didn't know me, didn't need me. As he spoke, I could feel the last threads of our connection fraying, unraveling under the weight of his new life. A life that seemed to have no room for the mother who had given him everything. The holiday season loomed, and once again, Marcus was off to Switzerland, swept up in the glittering world of Tyler's family. People who moved in circles of international banking, their influence as cold and sharp as the alpine air. He spoke of it with a spark in his voice, his excitement a blade that cut deeper than he seemed to realize. Meanwhile, I faced another Christmas alone, the silence of my house amplifying the ache in my chest. I sat in the dim glow of a single lamp, wondering when I'd faded into the background of my son's life, becoming a footnote in his story of ambition. How could he share these plans with such eagerness, untouched by guilt, while I wrestled with the growing weight of my own irrelevance? That sounds wonderful, I said, my voice barely a whisper, betraying the strength I'd meant to project. The words felt hollow, like they belonged to someone else. Marcus didn't notice. I'm so grateful for opportunities like this, he went on, his tone bright, oblivious to the way my heart sank. Tyler's family has really taken me under their wing. They treat me like I'm one of them. His words landed like a quiet betrayal. One of them. As if the family we'd built together, me, pouring every ounce of self into raising him, loving him through years of sacrifice, wasn't enough. As if the unconditional devotion I'd given for 2 decades was somehow less valuable than the fleeting approval of people who saw him as a shiny new asset, useful only as long as he fit their polished narrative. After we hung up, the silence in my house was deafening. I sat on the worn couch, staring at the walls that had once echoed with Marcus's laughter. his small voice declaring I was his hero. That night, the truth I'd been avoiding for months settled over me like a heavy fog. Marcus wasn't just away at college or caught up in a busy season of his life. He was gone, permanently. The boy who'd once clung to my legs, giggling about marrying me someday, had been replaced by a young man who saw me as a relic, a reminder of a past he was eager to outgrow. I wasn't part of his future anymore. I was an obstacle, a tie to a life he'd decided didn't suit the image he was crafting. It wasn't tragedy or a fight that had taken him from me. It was ambition, sharp and relentless, paired with a kind of shame that made my heart twist. Marcus had decided that to climb the ladder of success, he needed to erase where he came from. I was a liability now, a piece of his story that didn't align with the elite circles he was chasing. My modest life, my small restaurant, the years of scraping by, they didn't fit the persona he was building. That night, I let myself cry, the kind of raw, unrestrained sobbing I hadn't allowed in years. I cried for the little boy who'd helped me count the register at Beverly's kitchen, his face glowing with pride when customers raved about our food. I cried for the teenager who'd promised we'd always be a team. I cried for the dreams I'd held on to, of staying close as he grew into adulthood, of spoiling grandchildren while he teased me for my over-the-top affection. Most of all, I cried for the woman I'd been, the mother who'd believed love was enough, that sacrifice would be seen and valued, that the bond we'd built was unbreakable. I'd been wrong, so painfully wrong. When the tears finally dried, I felt hollow, but strangely clear. Marcus had made his choice, and now I had to make mine. I couldn't keep pouring my heart into someone who saw it as an embarrassment. I couldn't keep clinging to the hope of reconciliation with a son who had already moved on. It was time to let go, not just of Marcus, but of the version of myself that had existed only to nurture his dreams. Who was Beverly Anderson when she wasn't defined as Marcus's mother? I'd built something from nothing before, survived single motherhood, poverty, and the grind of starting a business. That woman, resilient and fierce, was still in me somewhere. It was time to find her again, to rebuild a life that didn't depend on Marcus's approval or presence. 3 weeks later, on a cold Tuesday morning in January, I was at Beverly's kitchen, sifting through beverage orders, when my phone rang. It was Patricia Henley, my attorney, her voice carrying an urgency that stopped me cold. "Beverly, I need you to come in as soon as possible," she said. "I've received documents that require your immediate attention. How quickly can you be here?" Patricia had handled my business affairs for over a decade, and she wasn't one for theatrics. Her tone told me this was serious. I grabbed my coat, my mind racing with possibilities. Tax issues, a licensing problem with the restaurant, some legal challenge I hadn't seen coming. Within the hour, I was driving downtown, the city blurring past as my thoughts spiraled. Patricia's office, on the third floor of a restored Victorian building, was a place of calm authority with its mahogany paneling and leather-bound law books. She'd guided me through the expansion of Beverly's kitchen, navigated countless challenges, and over the years had become more than just my attorney, a friend, someone I trusted implicitly. But today, her face was somber, her usual warmth replaced by a gravity that made my stomach tighten. "Sit down, Beverly," she said. "What I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to process." She opened a thick manila folder and spread documents across her desk like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known existed. Bank statements, legal letters, certified documents with official seals. My name appeared on many, but the account numbers and figures were foreign to me. "These arrived yesterday from Harrison Walsh and Associates in Manhattan," Patricia began. "They're executors for the estate of Eleanor Whitman. Does that name mean anything to you?" I shook my head, confused. "I've never heard of her." Patricia's expression grew even more serious. "That's what I expected. Eleanor Whitman died 6 months ago at the age of 87. According to these documents, she was your biological grandmother." The words hit me like a shockwave, incomprehensible, as if she'd spoken in another language. My grandmother. My mother had died when I was 3, and my father had always told me her family was gone, that we were alone in the world. It was why I'd worked so hard to build a family with Marcus, to create the connections I'd never had. "That's impossible," I said, my voice trembling. "My father told me my mother's family died before I was born." Patricia's eyes softened, but her tone remained steady. According to the estate documents, Eleanor Whitman spent 37 years searching for you. She hired private investigators, worked with adoption agencies, contacted genealogy services. She only found you 18 months ago. The room seemed to tilt, and I gripped the arms of my chair, trying to anchor myself. Found me? What do you mean, found me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Patricia's next words hit like a tidal wave. Beverly, your father told your grandmother you died in the same accident that killed your mother. She's been mourning you for over 50 years. The weight of that revelation was crushing. My father had lied, not just to me, but to my grandmother, letting her believe I was dead while I grew up, believing I had no family left. Why would he do that? My mind reeled, piecing together fragments of a life I'd never known. Patricia consulted another document. Based on the correspondence from Eleanor's attorneys, there was a significant falling out between your father and your mother's family after her death. There was a custody dispute, accusations about your father's fitness as a parent, threats of legal action. Rather than fight, your father disappeared with you and let everyone believe you died. My entire sense of self, my understanding of my place in the world, unraveled in that moment. I wasn't alone, as I'd always believed. There had been someone out there, Eleanor Whitman, searching for me, grieving for me, holding on to hope that I might still be alive. The betrayal of my father's lie was a wound I hadn't expected, cutting deeper than Marcus's rejection. What else do the documents say? I asked, bracing myself for more. Patricia turned to another page. Eleanor Whitman was quite wealthy. She never married, never had other children. She built a successful textile business in New York, owned significant real estate, and maintained diverse investment portfolios. When she died, her estate was valued at approximately $14 million. The number was staggering, almost unreal. I'd spent my life counting every penny, working endless hours to provide for Marcus, building a modest safety net through sheer determination. All that time, there had been a grandmother I'd never known, with wealth that could have erased every financial worry I'd ever carried. The irony was almost too much to bear, a cruel twist in a story I was only beginning to understand. The revelation hit me like a tidal wave, crashing over the fragile walls I'd built around my heart. For 18 months, my grandmother Eleanor, a woman I'd never known, had poured her waning energy into finding me. She'd sifted through public records, pieced together fragments of my life, learned about my modest kitchen business, and even discovered Marcus, my son. Her intention had been to reach out, to bridge the chasm of years and loss, but a stroke stole her defiance before she could. The weight of that unrealized connection pressed against my chest, a grief so sharp it felt like losing something I'd only just found. It wasn't just the fortune she left behind, though its scale was dizzying. It was the possibility of knowing her, of hearing stories about my mother from someone who cherished her deeply. I could have shared Marcus's triumphs with a grandmother who would have celebrated him without judgment, who might have filled the gaps in our fractured family with her love. I sat there, eyes closed, trying to anchor myself against the storm of emotions. The loss wasn't just Eleanor. It was the bond we could have forged, the stories we could have shared, the pride she might have taken in my resilience. My kitchen, built from years of sweat and sacrifice, was something she'd valued from afar. Even as Marcus grew distant, his eyes fixed on a world that seemed to shame him for our roots. The thought of Eleanor's care, her unseen devotion, made my throat tighten. I could almost see her, a stranger with my mother's eyes, piecing together my life like a puzzle she refused to abandon. Patricia, my attorney, spoke again, her voice soft but deliberate, as if she knew the ground beneath me was shifting. There's more, Beverly. She slid a copy of Eleanor's will across her desk, her finger resting on a highlighted passage. I took the document, my hands trembling as I read words that seemed to pulse with intention. Eleanor had left everything to me, her entire estate, a fortune I could scarcely comprehend. But it was the condition she'd attached that stopped my breath. If I chose to share this inheritance with Marcus, or any children I might have, it was at my discretion, provided they showed genuine love, respect, and loyalty to me. Eleanor's words were clear. Her legacy was not to be squandered on those who would exploit my generosity or treat me with anything less than the honor I deserved. I read the passage again, each word sinking deeper into my soul. How could she have known? How could a woman I'd never met have understood the ache of watching my son drift away, his respect for me eroding as he chased social status? Patricia's answer came quietly, her eyes steady on mine. Eleanor hired private investigators. They were thorough, Beverly. She had detailed reports about your life, your business, your struggles, your relationship with Marcus. She knew about his college expenses, his ambitions, the way he's been pulling away from you. A bitter laugh escaped me, raw and jagged. Eleanor, a stranger, had seen what I'd been too heartbroken to fully admit. Marcus's growing indifference, his subtle disdain for the life I had built. She cared more about how he treated me than he did himself. The irony twisted in my gut. For months, I'd been drowning in guilt, convinced I'd failed as a mother because I couldn't hold on to Marcus's love. I'd lain awake at night, replaying every sacrifice, every late shift in the kitchen, wondering where I'd gone wrong. And all the while, Eleanor had been watching, her heart reaching across the distance to protect me from a son who might take me for granted. Patricia continued, her voice a gentle anchor. Eleanor was explicit about the inheritance. She wanted you to have time to observe Marcus's behavior as an adult before deciding whether to share it with him. She was adamant that her legacy should only go to family who truly value you. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Eleanor had seen Marcus's distance for what it was, not just youthful rebellion, but a choice, a pattern of behavior that dismissed my worth. She'd crafted her will to shield me, to ensure her fortune wouldn't enable someone who didn't honor me. I leaned back, my mind reeling. When can I access it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Immediately, Patricia replied. The estate's been in probate for 6 months, but it's finalized now. There are bank accounts, investment portfolios, real estate in Manhattan and the Hamptons, plus artwork and jewelry. The attorneys in New York are ready to arrange transfers whenever you're prepared. The scope of it was overwhelming. In a single moment, I'd gone from a woman scraping by, pouring every ounce of herself into a small business, to the heir of a vast fortune. But more than the money, it was Eleanor's faith in me that shook me to my core. She'd seen value in me, even when I felt invisible to the one person I'd given everything for. My heart ached with the weight of her absence, but also with gratitude for her foresight, her fierce determination to protect me. I met Patricia's gaze, my voice steady despite the storm inside. I need your honesty, Patricia. Based on what you know about Marcus, do you think he'd treat me differently if he knew about this money? She paused, her expression softening with a mix of affection and regret. Beverly, you know I care about Marcus. I've watched him grow, cheered his successes. But based on what you've shared about his recent behavior and what I saw when he was here last, reviewing his college paperwork. She trailed off, but her eyes told the story. You think he'd suddenly care about our relationship again? I said, the words tasting like ash. Patricia sighed. I think he'd be very interested in maintaining a good relationship with his mother if he knew she'd inherited $14 million. The truth landed like a blow, knocking the air from my lungs. My own attorney, who'd known Marcus since he was a boy, believed he was capable of feigning love for financial gain. The realization cut deeper than I'd expected, confirming the fears I'd buried beneath hope. I'd spent years rationalizing Marcus's distance, telling myself it was a phase, that he'd come back to me. But now the possibility that his affection could be bought felt like a betrayal of everything I'd poured into him. What are my options? I asked, my voice hollow. Patricia leaned back, her tone calm but firm. Legally, the choice is yours. Eleanor's will gives you full discretion. You could give Marcus half the estate now. You could set up a trust for his future children. You could donate it all to charity, or you could keep it for yourself. It's entirely up to you. She paused, her eyes searching mine. And if you want to test Marcus to see what kind of person he's become, that's within your rights. Given Eleanor's concerns, it might be exactly what she hoped you'd do. I spent hours in Patricia's office poring over documents that detailed the staggering breadth of Eleanor's estate. The numbers were dizzying: millions in liquid assets, investment properties, a townhouse on Manhattan's Upper East Side worth more than I could fathom, a sprawling Hamptons estate that sounded like something from a dream. There were stocks, bonds, artwork by masters, jewelry appraised at hundreds of thousands. But it was the private investigators' reports that gripped me most. They painted a portrait of Eleanor's life, a woman who'd spent decades searching for a granddaughter she thought was lost forever. Handwritten notes in her careful script filled the margins. Beverly shows remarkable strength and determination. She's built something impressive from nothing. Marcus seems ungrateful for his mother's sacrifices. I worry he takes advantage of her generosity. Each word was a revelation, a mirror reflecting truths I'd been too afraid to face. Eleanor had seen me, really seen me, when Marcus couldn't. She'd celebrated my resilience, my small victories, while he dismissed them as embarrassments. The contrast was shattering. I'd spent so long chasing his approval, apologizing for my modest life, that I'd forgotten my own worth. But Eleanor hadn't. She'd understood me in a way I hadn't dared hope for. That night, alone in my quiet house, I made a choice. I wouldn't tell Marcus about the inheritance. Not yet. I'd wait, watch how he treated me as his life unfolded. If he could find his way back to genuine love, to the loyalty we'd once shared, then Eleanor's legacy would be his too. But if he continued to drift, treating me as a relic of a past he wanted to erase, he'd never know what he'd lost. Eleanor had given me more than wealth. She'd given me the power to demand respect, to refuse to settle for less than I deserved. For too long, I'd begged for Marcus's attention, clinging to scraps of his affection. Now I could afford to wait for something real. The weeks that followed were a blur of new realities. I met with financial advisors, opened bank accounts, and toured properties I now own but had never imagined. The Manhattan townhouse was a marvel, its rooms filled with antiques and art that spoke of Eleanor's refined taste. The Hamptons estate was breathtaking, with sprawling grounds and ocean views that stole my breath. In both homes, I found traces of my mother, photographs of her as a young woman, radiant and full of life, images I'd never seen before. There were albums chronicling Eleanor's world, her business triumphs, her travels, her friendships, evidence of a life rich with meaning, even as she grieved a granddaughter she thought was gone. In Eleanor's study, I found a letter addressed to me, its envelope sealed but heavy with promise. I held it, my fingers tracing her handwriting, knowing it contained her final words to me. I wasn't ready to open it yet, but its presence was a comfort, a tether to a woman whose love had reached across time to find me. Eleanor had given me more than an inheritance. She'd given me a mirror to see my own strength, a reminder that I was worthy of love that didn't come with conditions. And as I stood in her home, surrounded by her legacy, I felt the stirrings of a new resolve, to live, to choose, to demand the respect I'd earned. My dearest Beverly, if these words have reached you, it means the investigators found you, and I am no longer here to meet you in person. The sorrow of this reality cuts deeper than I can express. The years we lost, decades that should have been filled with shared laughter, stories, and the warmth of family, were stolen by forces I still cannot fully comprehend. The ache of that absence has been my constant companion. Yet discovering you were alive brought a light to my final days that I never thought possible. Knowing of your resilience, your triumphs in building a business from nothing, and your fierce devotion to your son, Marcus, filled my heart with a pride so profound it felt like a living thing inside me. You are more than I ever dared hope you would become. A woman of strength, grace, and unyielding love. I've watched from a distance as Marcus has begun to pull away from you, and it shatters me. I recognize this behavior from years in business, where I've seen those of weak character turn from the very people who lifted them up. They rewrite their stories, shamed of their roots, craving a polished image that erases the sacrifices made for their success. It grieves me to see this in your son, and I refuse to let my legacy reward such ingratitude. You, Beverly, have earned respect through your toil and sacrifice. You deserve to be cherished, not dismissed or taken for granted. My inheritance is yours to use wisely, but more than that, it is a tool to demand the love and honor you are owed. Never settle for less than authentic connections, genuine appreciation, and unwavering devotion. You are worthy of all these things and more. With all the love and admiration my heart can hold, your grandmother, Eleanor Beverly Anderson, sat alone in the quiet of Eleanor's Manhattan townhouse, the weight of her son's words still echoing in her mind. The sterile hum of the hospital had been a lie, a carefully constructed test to gauge Marcus's loyalty, but his response had shattered her. When she'd called him in early June, her voice trembling with feigned fragility, she'd hoped he'd hear the fear she'd poured into her words, fear not just of the fictional complications from her surgery, but of losing the son she'd raised. "Marcus, I need you to come home," she'd said, her tone small and pleading. "The surgery didn't go as planned. There are complications, and I'll be hospitalized for weeks. I need help managing things." She'd waited, her heart pounding with a desperate hope that he'd rise to the occasion, that he'd prove he still saw her as more than a means to his own ends. But Marcus's voice, crackling through the phone from London, had carried no warmth, only a calculated concern. "Oh no, Mom, that's terrible," he'd said. And for a fleeting moment, Beverly clung to the possibility that she'd misjudged him. Maybe the boy who used to cling to her legs, declaring his love with unfiltered adoration, was still in there. But then he'd asked, "How serious are the complications?" And the question felt less like worry and more like an assessment of how much this would disrupt his carefully curated life. When she explained she couldn't live alone, needed someone to manage medical appointments in the restaurant, his pause was deafening. She could almost hear him weighing his internship, his networking, his future against her plea. "Mom, I wish I could help, but I can't just leave London right now," he'd said. "This internship is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If I abandon it, it could ruin my chances with major firms next year." The words cut deeper than any surgical blade could. Beverly's fear, her isolation, her need for her only family to stand by her, it was all secondary to his ambition. She tried again, her voice raw with vulnerability. "Marcus, I'm scared. I don't know what's going to happen, and I've never felt so alone." But he dismissed her, his tone sharp with impatience. "You're being dramatic. You have doctors for the medical stuff, and you can hire help for everything else. This isn't the kind of emergency that requires family to drop everything." Her hospitalization, her terror, her need for him wasn't enough to pull him away from his networking dinners and polished resume. "I see," she'd whispered, the words barely escaping her lips as something inside her hardened. Marcus's final blow came when he said, "I can't sacrifice my entire future because you're having medical problems. That's not fair to ask of me." Fair. The word stung, a cruel irony from the son whose education she'd funded, whose dreams she'd nurtured, whose every step towards success she'd paved with her own sacrifices. As she sat in the townhouse, the cold realization settled in her chest like a stone. Marcus wasn't the paw she'd raised anymore. That child who'd once looked at her with boundless love had been replaced by a young man who saw relationships as transactions, who valued people only for what they could offer his assent. The pain of that truth was sharper than any physical ailment, and it fueled her resolve. Marcus needed to learn that choices carried weight, that neglecting family for ambition could cost him something irreplaceable. When Marcus returned from London in late August, he carried himself with the polished confidence of someone who believed the world was his to conquer. His year abroad had added a layer of European sophistication to his already meticulously crafted persona. His voice, when he called to announce his return, was casual, almost detached, as if he were checking in with an acquaintance rather than his mother. "I'm back at Princeton, getting ready for senior year," he said, his tone brimming with self-assurance. "The London program was incredible. I made connections with major players in international finance. My resume is going to be untouchable when I start interviewing." Beverly listened, her heart aching at the distance in his words. "That's wonderful, honey," she replied, keeping her voice even, masking the storm of emotions beneath. When he asked, almost as an afterthought, "How are you feeling, by the way? You mentioned some health issues before I left." She saw her opening. "Actually, Marcus, I've been meaning to talk to you about that," she said, her voice steady but laced with purpose. "Could you come home this weekend? There are some things we need to discuss in person." His surprise was palpable, as if the idea of returning to his childhood home was an inconvenience he hadn't anticipated. "Mom, I'm swamped with senior year prep," he said, his tone tinged with irritation. Interviews with the investment firms start soon, and I need to be ready. Can't we just talk on the phone? Beverly insisted, her voice firm. I'd really prefer to do this face to face. It's important. She could sense his reluctance, the mental calculus as he weighed the trip against his packed schedule. Fine, Tim, he said finally. I can drive down Saturday morning, but I'll need to head back Sunday afternoon. I have a networking event Sunday evening I can't miss. Even now, his priorities were clear. His mother's request was just another item to fit into his agenda. Beverly spent the week preparing, her emotions a tangle of resolve and sorrow. She wanted the house to strike the right balance, comfortable but not ostentatious, a reflection of the life she'd built without flaunting the wealth she'd inherited from Eleanor. She arranged for Rosa and Jimmy to manage Beverly's kitchen for the weekend, telling them she had critical family matters to attend to. Most importantly, she coordinated with Patricia Henley, her attorney, to bring the necessary documents to the house on Saturday afternoon. This conversation with Marcus would be a reckoning, and she needed everything in place. When Marcus's car pulled into the driveway that gray, drizzly Saturday morning, Beverly watched from the window, her heart heavy. He stepped out, the picture of Ivy League success, expensive casual clothes, a sharp haircut from an upscale salon, in a posture that exuded confidence. Hey, Mom, he said, offering a brief hug that felt perfunctory, a gesture checked off a list. You look good, better than you sounded at last spring. His words were polite but lacked warmth, as if he were assessing her recovery to gauge how much it would demand of him. I'm feeling much better. Thank you, she replied, leading him to the living room where she'd set out coffee and pastries from the restaurant, his old favorites, though he declined them, likely mindful of his polished image. They sat across from each other, and Beverly studied her son. His face was handsome, his demeanor polished, but there was a hollowness in his eyes, a void where the boy she'd known used to be. She took a breath, steadying herself for the conversation that would change everything. Marcus, she began, her voice calm but weighted with purpose. I need to tell you about something that happened while you were away. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with the certainty that this moment would define their relationship and the consequences of his choices forever. The air in the living room felt heavy, charged with an unspoken tension that seemed to cling to every word. Beverly sat across from her son, Marcus, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her heart a tangle of hope and hurt. She'd rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times in her mind, but now, with Marcus sitting there, his polished exterior betraying no hint of the emotional storm she was about to unleash, she felt a flicker of doubt. Would he understand? Could he? His eyes, so like her own, darted around the room, restless, as if he were already calculating how quickly he could escape this unexpected summons from his mother. He leaned forward slightly, his posture stiffening, sensing that this wasn't going to be one of their usual perfunctory check-ins. I've uncovered something that's going to change both our lives in ways I never imagined, Beverly began, her voice steady but laced with a quiet intensity. She watched his face closely, searching for any sign of genuine curiosity. Marcus's brows lifted, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. What kind of something? He asked, his tone cautious, as if bracing for a revelation he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. Beverly took a deep breath, the weight of her discovery pressing against her chest. I found out I had family I never knew existed. Family I had, I mean. My grandmother, my mother's mother, was alive until just recently. She passed away about 8 months ago. The words felt strange on her tongue, like they belonged to someone else's story. Marcus blinked, his expression shifting into something that looked like authentic shock, though Beverly couldn't be sure. He'd always been good at masking his true feelings, a skill honed by years of navigating elite social circles that demanded perfection. Your grandmother, he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. But I thought all your relatives were gone. You always said you were alone. So did I, Beverly replied, her gaze steady but piercing. That's what my father told me, over and over, until I believed it. But it was a lie, one of many, it turns out. She paused, letting the weight of that betrayal settle between them. Marcus's face remained unreadable, but she could sense the gears turning in his mind, processing this unexpected twist in the narrative he'd always taken for granted. For a moment, she wondered if he felt the same sting of betrayal she had when she learned the truth, but she quickly dismissed the thought. Marcus had never been one to dwell on family wounds, not when there were more pressing concerns, like his career, his image, his relentless climb up the social ladder. There's more, she continued, her voice softening but carrying an edge of resolve. My grandmother's name was Eleanor Whitman. She spent decades searching for me, Marcus. Decades. She only found me a few months before she died. The ache in her chest deepened as she spoke, a mix of grief for the connection she'd never had and awe at the persistence of a woman she'd never met. She could still picture the faded photographs she'd found in Eleanor's files. Snapshots of a life she'd been robbed of, a family she'd been told didn't exist. Marcus leaned back, his surprise giving way to something warmer, more engaged. Wow, Mom, that's incredible, he said, his voice softening with what seemed like genuine sympathy. I mean, it's heartbreaking that you never got to meet her, but it's amazing to know you weren't as alone as you thought. For a fleeting moment, Beverly felt a spark of hope. Maybe she'd misjudged him. Maybe beneath the polished veneer and self-absorbed ambition, there was still a son who cared, who could share in her joy and sorrow. But the moment passed and she steeled herself for what came next. There's more to it, Marcus, she said, her tone shifting, more deliberate now. Eleanor left me her entire estate. The words landed like a thunderclap, and she saw the shift in Marcus's demeanor immediately. He set his coffee cup down with a soft clink, his eyes locking onto hers with a sudden, razor-sharp focus. Her estate? He asked, his voice carefully neutral, but Beverly could hear the undercurrent of curiosity, the hunger for details. What kind of estate are we talking about? She held his gaze, letting the moment stretch, savoring the way his attention had snapped into place. A substantial one, she said at last. Properties in Manhattan and the Hamptons, investment portfolios, artwork, jewelry. The total value is approximately $14 million, and the number hung in the air like a live wire, crackling with possibility. Beverly watched Marcus's face, cataloging every micro-expression that flickered across it. Shock, followed by a quick flash of calculation, and then something that looked dangerously close to excitement. His eyes widened, and for the first time since he'd walked through the door, he seemed fully present, every ounce of his attention riveted to her. 14 million, he echoed, his voice warmer now, almost reverent. Mom, that's life-changing money. There it was, the shift she'd been dreading. The son who'd barely had time to visit, who'd brushed off her calls with vague excuses about internships and networking, was suddenly alight with enthusiasm. Have you thought about what you're going to do with it? He pressed, leaning forward, his tone brimming with eagerness. I mean, you'll want to invest most of it wisely, right? I could connect you with some finance guys I've met through school. They manage portfolios for really wealthy families, and they could help you maximize your returns. Beverly's heart sank, though she kept her expression neutral. Already, Marcus was inserting himself into the equation, positioning himself as indispensable, the gatekeeper to her newfound wealth. The son who'd been too busy to check on her when she told him she was hospitalized was now brimming with unsolicited advice, his ambition laid bare. She felt a pang of disappointment, sharp and familiar, but she pushed it aside. This was why she'd called him here. This was the test she'd known was coming. Actually, Marcus, she said, her voice calm but firm, that's part of what I wanted to talk to you about. Eleanor's will came with some very specific conditions about how the inheritance should be handled. She reached for the folder she'd prepared, her fingers brushing the smooth paper as she pulled out the documents she'd pored over for weeks. Marcus's eyes followed her movements, a flicker of unease crossing his face. What kind of conditions? He asked, his tone wary now, as if sensing the ground shifting beneath him. Beverly handed him the papers, her expression unreadable. Eleanor knew about you, Marcus. She knew about our relationship, our family. She'd been having me investigated for over a year before she died, learning everything she could about the life I'd built and the people in it. She paused, letting the word investigated sink in. Marcus shifted in his seat, his discomfort palpable. Investigated, he said, a trace of indignation in his voice. That feels kind of intrusive, don't you think? She wasn't trying to invade my privacy, Beverly said, her voice steady. She was trying to understand who I'd become, what kind of life I'd created. She wanted to make sure her fortune went to someone who deserved it. She let the word deserve hang in the air, watching as Marcus's expression darkened, a flicker of unease giving way to something colder, more guarded. And she wanted to ensure it wouldn't be squandered on people who didn't truly value family. Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly, and Beverly could almost see the calculations unfolding behind them. What exactly did her will say? He asked, his voice tight. She handed him the relevant section, a single sheet of paper that outlined Eleanor's carefully crafted provisions. As he read, his face grew paler, his eyes darting across the words that tied distributions to family members who demonstrated genuine love and respect for her. When he finished, he set the document down, his hands unsteady, his composure fraying at the edges. She was evaluating me, he asked, his voice low, a mix of shock and defensiveness. Based on how I treated you? Beverly nodded, her gaze unwavering. She was concerned about some things she'd observed, she said, choosing her words with care. The way you've been pulling away from our family over the years. Your discomfort with our background, the way you've prioritized social ambition over family loyalty. Each word landed like a blow, and she saw Marcus flinch, though he tried to hide it. He set the paper down, his jaw tightening. Mom, whatever this woman thought she saw, she didn't know the whole story, he said, his tone edged with frustration. College is demanding. Building a career takes sacrifices. That doesn't mean I don't love you or value our relationship. Doesn't it? Beverly asked, her voice soft but piercing. The question hung between them, heavy with the weight of months, years of accumulated pain. She could see Marcus struggling, his mind racing as he tried to find a way to navigate this conversation, to reclaim the advantage he'd always been so adept at securing. But this time there was no easy answers, no charming smile that could to deflect the truth. Of course not, he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. You're my mother, I love you. I've always loved you. But the words felt hollow, rehearsed, and Beverly's heart ached at the memory of all the times she'd wanted to believe them. Then let me ask you something, she said, leaning forward, her eyes locked on his. When I told you I was in the hospital, when I called you scared and alone because of complications from my surgery, asking you to come home, what did you say? Marcus's face flushed, a mix of shame and panic flickering in his eyes. He knew this moment was coming, the one he couldn't charm or manipulate away. I told you I couldn't leave London, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. I said my internship was too important to walk away from. Beverly nodded, her expression unyielding. You told me it wasn't the kind of emergency that justified dropping everything. You said it wasn't fair of me to ask you to sacrifice your future for my medical problems. The words cut deep, and she saw Marcus wince, his hands clenching into fists as he realized there was no way to spin those words into something noble or loving. Mom, that was... He trailed off, his voice breaking, as if he couldn't find the words to defend himself. I was young, under pressure. I made a bad call. Beverly's eyes softened, but her resolve didn't. That was who you are, Marcus, she said quietly. When someone you claim to love is terrified, alone, and begging for your support, you chose networking opportunities over their well-being. The truth of it settled between them, stark and unyielding, and she saw the panic in Marcus's eyes deepen as he grasped the stakes of this conversation. The casual arrogance he'd walked in with was gone, replaced by a desperate edge that bordered on raw fear. I messed up, he said quickly, his voice rising. I was selfish, okay? But that doesn't mean I don't care about you. It doesn't mean I don't deserve to share in this inheritance. Deserve? Beverly repeated, her voice low, almost dangerous. Tell me, Marcus, what have you done to earn $14 million? The question landed like a blow, and for a moment Marcus was silent, his eyes wide, his mind scrambling for a response. I'm your son, he said at last, his voice raw with emotion. Doesn't that count for something? Beverly's heart twisted, a mix of love and sorrow swirling inside her. Are you? She asked softly. Because for the past 2 years, you've acted like being my son was something to be ashamed of, something to hide from your fancy friends, something that got in the way of your ambitions. Marcus fell silent, his shoulders sagging as the weight of her words sank in. She could see him grappling with the truth, searching for a way to salvage the situation, to rewrite the narrative. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost childlike, a tone she hadn't heard in years. "Mom, I know I haven't been the best son," he admitted, his eyes glistening. "College changed me, maybe in ways I'm not proud of. But we can fix this. I can be better. I want to be better." "Do you?" Beverly asked, her voice gentle but unyielding. "Or do you want a piece of $4 million?" Before Marcus could respond, the doorbell rang, slicing through the tension like a knife. Beverly stood, her movements deliberate. "That's my attorney," she said, glancing at Marcus. "I asked her to come by because there are some legal documents that need to be signed today." She opened the door to Patricia, who stepped inside with her usual calm professionalism, her briefcase tucked under her arm. Patricia greeted Marcus with a polite nod, but Beverly caught the cool, assessing glint in her eyes as she took in his tailored clothes and carefully styled hair. They returned to the living room, and Beverly felt the air grow heavier, the weight of what was about to unfold pressing down on them all. "Patricia has been guiding me through the inheritance process," Beverly explained as they sat, her voice steady. "There are some choices that need to be made today about how Eleanor's estate will be distributed." Marcus glanced between them, his anxiety palpable. "What kind of decisions?" he asked, his voice tight. Patricia opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents, her movements precise. "As executor of Eleanor Whitman's estate, I'm tasked with ensuring her assets are distributed according to her wishes," she said, her tone measured. "The will gives Beverly full discretion over how much, if any, of the inheritance should be shared with family members." Marcus's face paled further, his eyes darting to her. "But I'm her only family," he said, his voice trembling with barely contained panic. "That's correct," Patricia replied, her tone calm but unyielding. "Which means Beverly must decide whether you've demonstrated the kind of character Eleanor wanted to see in someone worthy of her legacy." Beverly watched Marcus closely as the reality hit him. His future, the financial security he'd been so quick to assume was his, hung entirely on the relationship he'd spent years eroding. The confident young man who'd walked in, so sure of his place in the world, was now unraveling, his polished exterior cracking under the weight of his own neglect. "Mom, please," he said at last, his voice breaking, a raw, desperate edge to it. "I know I haven't been perfect, but I'm still your son. I'm still family." "Are you, Marcus?" Beverly asked, her voice soft but heavy with the pain of years. "When was the last time you treated me like family, instead of an inconvenience to be swept aside?" The question lingered unanswered as the room seemed to pulse with the weight of everything left unsaid. Marcus stood frozen, his jaw tightening as he struggled to find words that could bridge the chasm between us. His eyes, wide with a mix of disbelief and panic, searched my face for any hint of leniency, but his lips pressed shut again, as if the weight of his own silence crushed any defense he might have conjured. Years of absence, of carefully curated distance, had left him without a single memory of warmth or connection to draw upon. No moment of genuine familial love he could point to as proof of his devotion. The realization seemed to hit him like a slow, suffocating wave, his shoulders slumping under the burden of his own choices. Patricia, ever composed, leaned forward, her voice steady but firm, as she laid out the legal stipulations with the precision of a surgeon. "Eleanor's will is crystal clear," she said, her fingers resting lightly on the stack of documents before her. "To inherit, any family member must show a sustained, heartfelt commitment to fostering a loving and respectful relationship with Beverly. Promises of change won't suffice. There must be tangible proof, years of consistent actions that demonstrate genuine care." Marcus's face twisted, a flicker of desperation breaking through his usual polished demeanor. "What kind of proof?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly, betraying the fear that gnawed at Hemans. He leaned forward, hands gripping the edge of the table as if it could anchor him against the storm of uncertainty. I met his gaze, my own heart heavy with the weight of what I had to say. The kind of proof that comes from years of showing up, Marcus, I said softly, my words laced with a quiet resolve. The kind that shows love means more to you than status or wealth. The kind that proves you value family over everything else. His brow furrowed, and for a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, wide-eyed, vulnerable, pleading for a chance to rewrite the past. But how can I prove that if you don't give me a chance, he pressed, his voice rising with a mix of frustration and urgency. How can I show I've changed if the inheritance is already decided? It was a fair question, one that tugged at the frayed edges of my maternal instincts. For a fleeting moment, I wanted to reach out, to smooth away the worry etched into his face, to believe that he could become the son I'd once dreamed he'd be. I wanted to trust that people could change, that love could rekindle where neglect had left ashes. But then the memories flooded back, sharp and unyielding. The phone calls cut short because he was too busy. The family celebrations he'd conveniently forgotten to invite me to. The dismissive way he'd brushed off my health struggles as if they were mere inconveniences. The years of being treated not as his mother, but as an embarrassing relic of a life he'd rather forget. Those memories anchored me, reminding me why we were here. Marcus, I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. The inheritance isn't a prize for promises you might keep tomorrow. It's a reflection of who you are today, shaped by the choices you've already made and the values you've shown over time. Patricia slid the primary distribution document across the table, its crisp pages heavy with finality. Marcus's eyes tracked every movement, his entire future teetering on the words I had yet to write. I could feel the weight of his gaze, a silent plea that I might reconsider, that I might see him as more than the sum of his past mistakes. But I couldn't ignore the truth. Based on my observations of Marcus's character and behavior over the past several years, I began, my voice slow and deliberate, and in accordance with Eleanor Whitman's wishes that her legacy only benefit those who demonstrate true family loyalty. Marcus held his breath, his face pale, as if the air itself had turned against him. I could see the terror in his eyes, the dawning realization that the fortune he'd taken for granted might slip through his fingers. I am establishing a trust fund, I continued, that will provide Marcus with a modest annual stipend, enough to supplement his career earnings, but not enough to replace the need to work or the chance to build his own character through effort. Relief flickered across his face, brief and fragile, like a candle flame in a storm, but it didn't last. The remainder of the estate, I said, my voice unwavering, approximately $13 million, will be donated to create scholarship funds for first-generation college students from working-class families, students whose parents work in food service, retail, manufacturing, jobs some might look down on, but which are the backbone of honest, hard-working lives. The color drained from Marcus's face, his expression collapsing into something raw and unguarded. He'd expected wealth, security, a life of ease handed to him on a silver platter. Instead, he was getting a modest allowance, enough to live comfortably, but far from the opulence he'd envisioned. The bulk of Eleanor's fortune would go to strangers, young people who cherished their families, who weren't ashamed of their roots. "Mom, you can't be serious," he whispered, his voice barely audible, as if saying it louder would make it more real. "I'm completely serious," I replied, my tone calm but resolute. Eleanor wanted her legacy to support those who understand the value of family, who prioritize authentic relationships over social climbing. Since you've shown that those aren't your priorities, the money will go to those who do. His eyes darted between me and Patricia, frantic, searching for a lifeline, a hint that this was a test, a cruel joke he could still escape. "This is insane," he said, his voice rising, sharp with disbelief. "I'm your son, your only family. You can't just give away $14 million to strangers." "Strangers who will honor their parents," I countered, my voice steady despite the pain of his words. "Strangers who won't try to erase their families from their lives or feel ashamed of where they come from. Marcus, you asked me to lie about my job when you introduced me to your college friends. You didn't invite me to your graduation because you thought I wouldn't fit in. For years, you've distanced yourself from everything that ties you to our life together." He fell silent, his usual confidence crumbling under the weight of those specific, undeniable truths. For a moment, he looked like he might argue, but the examples were too precise, too rooted in reality to refute. "People change," he said at last, his voice quieter, almost pleading. "I can change." My heart ached at the words, at the faint echo of the boy who used to run to me with open arms. "I'm sure you can," I said softly. "And when you do, when you find someone to love who loves you back, when you build a family and understand what it means to sacrifice everything for them, maybe then you'll see why I made this choice." Patricia handed me a pen and I signed the document, each stroke of ink sealing Eleanor's legacy into something that honored her values: loyalty, authenticity, respect for honest work. Marcus watched, his face a mask of devastation, as if the world he'd built in his mind was crumbling with every scratch of the pen. "The trust fund will provide you with $25,000 a year," I said as I set the pen down. "It's not enough for luxury, but it's enough to support the life you build for yourself." "25,000, he echoed, stunned, as if the number itself was an insult. "Out of 14 million, you're giving me 25,000 a year?" "I'm giving you what your actions have earned," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "If you'd treated me with love and respect, if you'd valued our bond over your need to climb the social ladder, if you'd shown even a flicker of care for my well-being, this would be a different conversation. But you didn't." The reality of his loss settled over him, heavy and inescapable. I could see it in the way his shoulders hunched, in the way his eyes glistened with unshed tears. Desperation flickered in his gaze, a last-ditch effort to salvage something. "Mom, please," he said, his voice breaking. "I know I haven't been perfect, but surely I deserve more than strangers. Surely being your son means something." "Blood means what you make of it, Marcus," I replied, my heart twisting at the pain in his voice. "You've spent years showing me that our connection was something to hide, something to be ashamed of. You've treated me like an obstacle, not a mother." Patricia gathered her documents with practiced efficiency, her movements signaling the finality of the moment. "The legal arrangements are complete," she said briskly. "The trust fund payments will begin next month, and the scholarship foundation will be established within 60 days. Marcus made one last desperate plea as Patricia prepared to leave. "What if I quit finance?" he asked, his voice trembling. "What if I came back to work at the restaurant with you? Would that prove I value family?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the polished young man who'd walked in that morning, but someone grappling with the consequences of his choices. "Marcus," I said softly, "if you came back to Beverly's kitchen because you genuinely wanted to rebuild our relationship, because you realize family matters more than status, that would mean the world to me. But if you came back just because you know there's money at stake, that would only prove Eleanor's point." He fell silent, the weight of my words settling over him. I could see the struggle in his eyes, the realization that any sudden change now would be tainted by self-interest. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted at last, his voice small, almost childlike. For the first time in years, he sounded like the boy I'd raised, not the calculating man he'd become. "You fix it by becoming someone worth loving," I said gently. "Someone who values people for who they are, not what they can offer. Someone who's proud of their roots, not ashamed of them." Patricia left, and Marcus and I sat in silence, the air thick with unspoken regrets. I watched him wrestle with the magnitude of what had just happened, his carefully planned future unraveling before him. "I need to go," he said finally, his voice hollow. "I have a networking event tonight." Even now, after losing $13 million because of his obsession with the status, he was choosing a networking event over time with me. Some lessons, it seemed, would take more than this to sink in. "Of course," I said quietly. "Drive safely." He rose slowly, moving like a man carrying an invisible wound. At the door, he turned back, his eyes meeting mine one last time, searching for something. Forgiveness, understanding, a second chance. But the moment passed, and he stepped out, leaving the weight of our fractured bond hanging in the air. As I sat across from my son Marcus, his question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of years of unspoken tension. Mom, is there any chance in the future, if I truly change, if I prove I can be better, that you might reconsider the distribution? His voice carried a mix of vulnerability and defiance, as if he were grappling with the reality that his choices had led us to this moment. I looked at him, this young man I'd poured my heart into, sacrificed for, and ultimately lost to the pull of his own ambitions. My chest tightened with a tangled knot of love, grief, and a faint flicker of hope. I saw the boy he once was, wide-eyed, clinging to my hand, believing I could fix the world. But I also saw the man he'd become, driven by a hunger for status and wealth that had pushed me to the margins of his life. "Marcus," I said softly, my voice steady despite the ache in my heart, "the money is gone. The legal arrangements are set in stone, and there's no going back. But you're not gone, not unless you choose to walk away for good. You'll always be my son, and my love for you will never waver. The real question isn't about money or inheritance. It's whether you can learn to love me for who I am, not for what I can give you." My words felt like a bridge extended across a chasm, one I wasn't sure he'd cross. His eyes searched mine, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the boy who used to run to me for comfort. He nodded slowly, his jaw tight, and without another word, he turned and walked out to his car. I stood at the window, watching his taillights fade into the distance. The silence of the house pressed against me, but it wasn't empty. It was full of the weight of what had just passed between us. That conversation had shifted something fundamental for both of us. For Marcus, it shattered the illusion that family love was a given, something he could take without giving back. For me, it was a declaration of my own worth. Never again would I let myself be treated as less than I deserved. I'd spent too many years bending, sacrificing, hoping my love would be enough to keep him close. But now I knew better. Love wasn't a transaction, and I was done paying for his affection. 3 months later, an envelope arrived, addressed to me in Marcus's familiar, slanted handwriting. It wasn't a text or a call, but a real letter, the kind that requires thought and intention. I held it for a moment, tracing the edges, my heart caught between caution and curiosity. When I opened it, his words spilled out like a confession. He wrote about our last conversation, how it had haunted him, forcing him to confront the choices he'd made and the person he'd become. He decided to take a semester off from Princeton, not to chase approval or to win me over, but to figure out who he was when he wasn't performing for the world. There was no mention of the inheritance, no hint that his soul-searching was a ploy to change my mind. Instead, he offered a simple, unadorned apology for how he treated me, promising to work toward becoming someone worthy of the love I'd always given him. Tears blurred my vision as I read his words. This wasn't the Marcus who'd once dismissed my sacrifices as inconsequential, who'd seen my love as a given rather than a gift. This was a young man beginning to see the world and himself through a clearer lens. I sat down to write back, my heart swelling with pride and a cautious hope. I told him how proud I was that he was taking time to reflect and grow. I invited him to come home, not to discuss money or legacies, but to simply be together, to rebuild what had been strained for so long. I sealed the letter and sent it off, feeling lighter than I had in years. 6 months later, Marcus came home for Christmas. For 3 days, we existed in a fragile, beautiful bubble of connection. We talked about everything except money, our dreams, our fears, the small moments that had shaped us. He helped in the kitchen at Beverly's, the community hub where I'd poured my energy for years. He wasn't there to prove a point or earn favor. He was there because he wanted to understand the work that had sustained our family, the labor he'd once overlooked in his pursuit of something grander. As we chopped vegetables side by side, he asked about my mother and grandmother, listening with genuine curiosity to stories he'd once brushed off as irrelevant. I could see the effort in his questions, the way he lingered on details about our family's history, as if trying to piece together the roots he'd once been so eager to escape. It wasn't a complete transformation. How could it be? Change like that takes time, a slow unraveling of old habits and a rebuilding of something new. But it was a start. In his eyes, I caught glimpses of the little boy who'd once loved me without condition, the one who'd believed I was his whole world. That boy wasn't gone, just buried beneath years of ambition and pride. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope that we might find our way back to each other. The following fall, the scholarship foundation my grandmother Eleanor had dreamed of came to life. It provided full college funding for 30 students from working-class families, young people whose eyes shone with the same hunger for opportunity I'd felt at their age. At the first awards ceremony, I met students who reminded me of myself, proud of their roots, grateful for their families, unashamed of the sacrifices that had brought them there. Marcus came with me, and I watched him move through the crowd, talking to the recipients with a warmth that caught me off guard. He asked about their families, their dreams, their plans, listening with an openness that felt real, not performative. Later, as we walked to the car, he turned to me, his voice quiet but certain. "I get it now, Mom. Why you made the choice you did. These kids, they'll never take their families for granted the way I did. They'll never be ashamed of parents who worked hard to give them a chance." I nodded, my throat tight. "No," I said, "they won't." That night, as we drove home from the ceremony, Marcus asked a question that cut straight to the heart of it all. "Do you ever regret giving away the money?" I didn't hesitate. "Never," I said, my voice steady with conviction. Eleanor's gift wasn't just the money. It was the power to choose how I wanted to be treated, to demand the respect I deserved, to refuse anything less than real, authentic love. And you used that power to teach me a lesson I might not have learned otherwise. I glanced at him, his face lit by the soft glow of the dashboard. I used that power to honor the values that mattered most to Eleanor and to me: family loyalty, genuine relationships, respect for honest work. If that taught you something, then the money did what it was meant to do. We drove the rest of the way in a comfortable silence, the kind that felt like understanding rather than distance. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was sitting next to a stranger who shared my DNA. I was sitting next to my son. The memory of the incident that had sparked this whole journey, the moment in the Goodwill parking lot where I'd been left to grapple with my own worth, felt like it belonged to someone else. That woman had been desperate to earn love through sacrifice, willing to diminish herself to keep her son close. But the woman driving home from the scholarship ceremony, surrounded by the legacy of her grandmother's love and wisdom, knew exactly what she was worth. And more importantly, she knew she'd never settle for less than she deserved.